to the latest episode of The Claw's Corner. Today's guest is a nationally recognized poet and teacher. She has been actively writing and publishing poetry for over 50 years. Her latest book is entitled The Limits of Light. Please welcome the extremely talented Susan A. Katz to The Claw's Corner. Susan, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Rich?
I am doing very well. Thank you very much for being on the show. I met you not too long ago. You were at a book signing at the Morris Library, and you wrote this book right here. Great book.
I did. Guilty.
And you read several of the poems. So you were very, very nice enough to give me the book, and I couldn't put it down. I read it in record time. So before we get started about the book, I have questions about you because I was doing my research on you and very impressed. I mean, as I mentioned, you've been doing this for over 50 years, writing and publishing poetry. So how old were you when you first realized that you had a love of poetry?
Very young. I was probably about 6 years old. My father was a very talented musician. He played any stringed instrument, and he used to play the mandolin. And then one night he was playing the mandolin, and he started singing a song that had a poem that had just been put to music. It was called a Rudyard Kipling poems, On the Road to Mandalay. And I was in love. I mean, I could see what he was singing. I could see the sun coming up like thunder. It was just amazing to me. And from that moment on, I just knew I loved poetry. There was something about it that spoke to me, and I wanted more poetry. And my dad got me, little books and read me poems, and I was hooked.
At 6 years old?
All my life.
Wow, that's very impressive. I know what I was doing at 6 years old. It wasn't reading Kipling or being in love with. So I'm really.
I wasn't reading it. I was listening to it.
So how old were you before you actually started writing it yourself?
I started writing poetry probably in junior high school. It used to drive my mother crazy because I would come home from school and I grew up in Manhattan, and we used to the kids would go out and play stickball. And she would say, go outside, play with your friends. No, I'm going to go to my room. I want to write some poems. It just was what I needed to be doing always. It was a way of expressing what I was feeling, what I was thinking. It just, my husband often says it's amazing how poetry speaks to you, because it's a language that I understand. I don't speak a foreign language. To some people, poetry is a foreign language.
Yeah.
For me, it just is the language that I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, that's very impressive. You know what? You made a great point that I want to talk about, because you said that when your mother was saying, go out, play outside with your friends. I interviewed a lot of people, and all the people that I interviewed, most of the people that have been, I'm going to talk about musicians right now. They do this for a living. And they said when they were a kid, they could care less what their friends were doing. They would go right upstairs, play their guitar all day. First thing they would do is wake up, play their guitar. During school, they would, try to play their guitar on break. So people who have a passion and are really good at it, seems like they put 1,000% into it, and they can really care less what else is going on around them. And you're just another example of the many interviews I've done where you said, nope, I had a love for it. I could really care less about doing this or that. And I stuck to poetry, and look where it got you.
Yeah, well, yeah, it really was. I mean, obviously, as a wife and a mother, my husband went to medical school. I had kids. You kind of had to put it on the back burner. But I mean, I have boxes. I would write my poems on a grocery tape. If that's all I could do while I got in the car, I'd have a line in my head. My husband and I ride our bike, and I really get annoyed with myself because I'm not one of these people who can write a poem in my head. I need to be able to put it down, and I'll be on the bike, and this poem will come into my head that I want to write down. And so it is a passion, and it's not something you choose. I think it chose me. I think poetry just chose me.
Do you always have a book or some kind of tablet with you at all times in case you have an idea? I don't want to forget this. Let me write this down now.
I always have something to write on, yes, except when we're on the bike, I don't. Although I did that once when we were in Italy. We were riding a bike, and I I actually found a piece of paper and I was kind of writing, because we write a tandem. So I'm on the back. I can write poetry while we're riding. I'm just, leg power out there. And we got lost. And my husband's looking at the map and looking at the map. It turns out I took one of the pages from the map and used that to write on. So we were totally lost. So I have to be a little careful about that.
That is hilarious. Now, when you first started writing poetry at an early age, what was your subject matter? What was like a breakup? Oh, woe is me. I'm so lonely. Was it things like that? Or did you write more about nature or whatever was going on in your life?
Oddly enough, I mean, I had a very happy, very safe, very comfortable childhood. And yet my poems were very dark. Somewhere in this house, there is I can't think of the word, but there's a book for graduation, and in it is one of my poems, and the title of the poem is Death. That also drove my mother crazy. She could never understand that. But I was fascinated by, I guess, I was a happy child, but I was fascinated by the darker side of things. And to this day, I think I write mostly about things that I need to exhale. It's like letting your breath out. So yeah, most of my poetry is heavy. I would not say I write light poetry.
Yeah, well, you know what? I think that's a good thing because it gives you an outlet to get these feelings out. So you're not keeping them bottled up and you're not spending tons of money on therapies. You can just write out all your feelings.
Poetry has been my therapy, no doubt about it.
Well, it's funny because I had a very similar childhood. I am one of the happiest people you'll ever meet. I love my life, but I love the dark side. I love horror movies. I love paranormal. I love just as you talked about, just for some reason, those subjects fascinate me, but I'm not obsessed with it. I don't dwell on it and I don't get depressed, but it's just for some reason, I love talking about it. I love watching things about it. So it's funny, just like you, I had a great childhood and a great adult life so far. So far, so good. Let's keep it that way.
That's right.
But I have that same fascination. That's why we're going to get into your book later. But I love the book that you wrote. But I want to talk about how you made the leap from writing poetry as a hobby to making it a profession.
While I was in college, I was actually encouraged not to be so poetic. I was taking English lit classes and we had to write papers, and the criticism would always be, you're too poetic. I want prose. I don't want poetry. When my husband was starting out in practice, I met someone who said, and we got friendly, and he said, there's a professor, you talked about how you like poetry. There's a professor at Rockland Community College by the name of Dan Masterson. He teaches poetry. You probably would love his class. Everyone says he's wonderful. And so the kids were in school. I had a little bit of time and I signed up for the class. And I was in heaven. I mean, Dan was just the world's best teacher. We would write poems, hand them in, and he called me in one day to his office and he said, you're really good. You need to take this seriously. And I'm going to give you some names of places to send your poems out to. And of course, 99.9% of the time when you send a poem out, you get a rejection slip. I did the first time and he said, send it out again. And I sent it out again. And the second time it was accepted for publication in a magazine called Bitterroot. The name of the editor of that was Katz. I have his picture right here in front of me because though there's no relation there, he was a mentor, a friend. I became the reviewer for books, on the book review editor for Bitterroot eventually. And I was with Bitterroot until it closed down. So it was almost as if it was meant to be. I met Dan, then I met Menka, and it just took off. And I started working for New York State Poets in Public Service, teaching poetry in the schools, doing programs in the schools. So it just evolved over the years.
Wow, you know what? That's really impressive. I'm not sure if you heard of him. It's a little known author. His name is Stephen King.
I believe I have.
He said that when he first started writing poetry, because just like you, he was a teacher, or when he was writing novels, and he had a nail on the wall, and he would put every rejection slip on that nail. The nail became so heavy from all the rejections that he had to get a spike because the nail fell out of the wall.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
for you to get on the first rejection, let me try one more time. Bam! All right, we got yourself a deal. So that's really impressive. As you said, I
Yeah.
think it was just meant to be, and you're obviously very good at it, and somebody saw that from you immediately, which is really good.
Yeah, it really was just a series of fortunate events, that I met the right people. And as I said, Dan and we've been friends since that time. And Menka unfortunately passed away, but we were, became more than poetry. We became friends. And it just, I don't know, I was doing what I loved doing. So it was amazing.
I think that's the most important thing. You have to love what you're doing. I know so many people that do things for an example, I did comedy for a while, and a lot of people would say, Rich, why are you always so happy? I said, I'm having fun. You have fun doing this? And I said, what are you doing this for? I think that they thought they would get up on stage at an open mic, somebody would see them, all right, we're going to sign you to a 5-year Comedy Central deal, but they had no fun doing it. They just wanted it for the fame and the fortune. Somebody that actually does something because they love it, that's where the success comes. So I love the fact that you don't do it just because you want your name in print and you want to be published, that you do it because you have a love for it and you've always had a love for it.
I really do. And I think one of the things that, I was really kind of like, it was like a bright light in my life were the people that I met. It was Dan, it was Menka. And then while I was teaching in a school in Nyack, New York, I was doing a program with the kids where we were listening to whale sounds, because we were talking about, writing about how to save the oceans and save the whales. This was many, many years ago, but I was very interested in environmental issues even back then. And the music teacher, Judith Thomas, was walking down the hall and poked her head in. I had all the shades closed in the classroom because I wanted to set the mood for the kids. And she said to me, meet me in my music room when you're done here today. Judith and I worked together for 30 years after that. We did special programs with teachers all around the country, with educators in Canada. And so I was just really gifted with beautiful, wonderful, talented people in my life. And that was, part of the inspiration.
Yeah. Well, you actually wrote several books with her as well.
Judith and I wrote 2 textbooks together on integrating the arts into school curriculum. And she was and is just an inspirational lady. She's just so talented. And yeah, it was a joy working with her, doing workshops. We did some of the craziest workshops. We were doing a workshop with some teachers in Pennsylvania, and when we got there, somebody had forgot to hire the room, so there was no place to teach. So we ended up teaching in a motel room. We had about 30 teachers, and we were on beds and chairs and on the floor. And yeah, but we had some amazing experiences over the years. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like it's like having fun and getting it done. I love that.
Exactly. Truthfully, you talk about, getting famous and making money. That is not the definition of being a poet on any level.
Well, I want to talk about, there's one of my favorite poets, and people probably don't even think of him as a poet, is Edgar Allan Poe. I love his stuff. I love his writing. And he was a very unhappy guy, if you know anything about his life. But another one that I went over to her house in Amherst, and I was very interested in just her life. I didn't really know much about her poetry, was Emily Dickinson.
Yes. Yeah.
And she was writing poetry because she was severely depressed. And she even said, she goes, I do not want this to see the light of day. This is just for me. It's personal. Fortunately for the public, but unfortunately for her, I guess her sister said, oh, she's dead. I'm going to publish it and make some money from that.
Right. Yeah. Well, of course, if you've ever taken a class in high school or college, you've heard of Emily Dickinson for sure.
Yeah.
Edgar Allan Poe, I mean, his poems were very dark and very heavy. They were a true reflection of his personality and his almost desperation in his poems. It's interesting, there are lines, there are poems that stick in your mind. And I was just trying to talked to someone today about poetry, and I was saying to them that it's not so much what a poem means as what a poem makes you feel. And it makes us feel different things. Oh, lift me as a wave, a leaf, a cloud. I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed. Percy Shelley. I don't know what he was talking about, whether it was a rejected love affair, whether he lost someone he loved. But I feel his desperation, his need to rise up from the despair in his life. That's what poetry is all about. And if it speaks to you in that way, then it's a successful poem for you. And poems that you love, I might not feel the way you feel them. So poetry is it's kind of a little complicated in that sense, but it's easy if you just allow yourself to feel what the poet is feeling.
Well, it brings up a perfect example of the movie Dead Poets Society with Robin Williams. And if you haven't seen the movie in a long time, there's a part where Ethan Hawke is severely shy, and he goes, "I need you have to get up here. You have to do something." And he couldn't think of anything. So he goes, "Look at that picture. What does it say?" And he just said, "First thing out of your mouth." And then out of his mouth came out the guy with the evil eyes and the crooked smile. But he just wrote a poem just because he started. And it was basically what you just said. It was from the heart and it was feeling. Had really no rhyme or reason. Didn't even have to make sense, but it came from what he was thinking at the time. And it's similar to art. This is what I can't stand about art. It's very similar to poetry. When somebody says, "Well, I don't like this." You just don't understand art, my friend. They get all condescending. It's like,
Right,
I could have, maybe I like poetry that rhymes every line, or maybe I like poetry that tells a story. You don't have to like everything. And just because you don't like something doesn't mean that you don't have to be a connoisseur of everything. So yeah, I think that there's a little bit of condescending in the arts where people think, "Oh, you just don't get it. That's why you don't like it."
Well, that's true. It's true. And I think it's one reason why poetry is it's out there. It's not really accepted in the way I would love it to be. And I think part of the reason is because we've mystified it and we've intellectualized it. When I taught poetry, what I taught my students was I can't write. Just one word: frustration, anger, fear, love. Doesn't matter. Put one word on the paper, and then find an image for it. Anger. What is something that says anger? Oh, a thunderstorm is angry. Okay, there's the start of your poem. It really is just that you expressing yourself. I might say anger is something else. I'll find a different image for it. But that's what makes it your poem. It's your feelings interpreted through your experiences and through your imagination. So poetry's not something way out there that we can't understand. We just have to allow ourselves to feel, not try to intellectualize, but just feel what the poet is saying.
I think it unfortunately has an unfair stigma against it. Like, oh, poetry is for, the artistic wannabes. They have people that they think just write poetry, and the lonely loner that just wants nothing to do with anybody and just loves himself or herself. It's just that I think that people think that it has a bad statement. That's the point I'm trying to make. But as you mentioned, the best poetry could be 2 lines, 1 word. It has that feeling, has emotion. And I love just going through books. I'm like, wow, this is really good. And like you said it perfectly. And I was thinking the same thing. Sometimes I have no idea what I'm reading, but I just love the way it flows. I love how eloquent it sounds, and it just has a great cadence to it. So I don't have to understand what they're saying. I could just enjoy it for what it is.
Exactly. And it should trigger something in you. When I was taking speech classes at college, I ended up using a T.S. Eliot poem for my final, where you had to present something. And I wasn't sure I knew what it meant, but I sure as heck knew what I was feeling when I read it. So that was the meaningful part of that experience, was that I was able to give a good reading, not because I understood T.S. Eliot all that well, but I certainly felt what he was feeling.
And what kind of poetry do you write?
Well, The Limits of Light was a kind of a journey off a different road for me, because I guess what you would call confessional contemporary poetry. My poetry is about, in general, this was my fourth book of poetry that came out, and the other three are books that deal with life, loss, love, all the things that make up a life. That was my way of dealing with things, losing my dad in a car accident. If I hadn't been able to write the poem, I think I would have exploded. It took me years to write it till I felt it was, finished. But that was, as you said before, that was my therapy. That was my place to go to exhale, to let my breath out, and to be able to breathe in again.
All right, so now on to your latest book, The Limits of Light. What is this book about?
This book is about the inspiration I felt when I went to the Villa Borghese in Rome and saw the statue by Bernini, The Rape of Persephone. I was just enthralled. It was huge stone with his fingers digging into her flesh, the terror in her face, the arrogance in his face. And I knew very little about the actual myth. And when I got home, I went to the bookstore, went to the library, got books about mythology and started reading. And I was simply fascinated by the stories. And the poem, The Rape of Persephone, became the first poem in the book that I wrote. And then I was hooked, and I started reading, and then I wrote The Limits of Light, which is the story of Icarus, who flew too close to the sun. And then there was another story and another story. And then what started to really resonate with me as I began reading was the fact that Greek mythology is the story of today. Those who called themselves the Greek gods could be transferred to names in the news today. And it was amazing to me. I had never experienced that kind of leap from one culture to another, one time to another. And I realized we haven't learned a thing. We do the same things. We make the same mistakes. We perpetrate the same evil upon one another. And the gods, in the name of their godliness, felt they could do anything and it would be right. So it was almost as if these poems needed to be written. They're narrative poems that tell a story, but I like to think that each poem has a morality at the end, something that we could have learned but didn't, and maybe still can. Maybe it's not too late.
Yeah, no, you said it perfectly. And this is a perfect time for that book, because as I was reading it, I said, almost every god I can put a name to of somebody today, either in the media, in politics, whoever you want to talk about. I'm like, oh, that's that person. This is this person. Every god is personified by somebody living right now. I was laughing so hard because this book is more relevant than ever. And I'm so glad you came out with it. You know what? I want to thank you, because I actually played Zeus a couple of years ago for this play company called the Grumbling Griffins. And I really had no idea what I was doing. I was just reciting lines. Now reading this book, I had a so much better understanding what I was actually doing and who I was playing. And my interest in Greek mythology has exploded. I have so many questions for you. When I was going through the book, I said, let me see what I can talk about. And I said, you know what? I want to talk about every poem for the most part. So I go down the list. So I don't know how much time you have. Hopefully, if you need a drink, get some popcorn, because this is going to be a fun conversation.
You're better aware of the poems, all the poems in the book. You just read it. I have to go back to it now. Yeah, which poem would you like to talk about?
I will. If you need me to refresh your memory, I'll be more than happy to.
Okay. Right. I'll grab a copy of my book right here. There we go.
Right. No, well, for me, there's no better place to start than the beginning with the poem entitled "The Gift." In the beginning. So, who is Eros?
Well, Eros was the god of love, and as the line says in the poem, who will you love if you're all by yourself? There's no one else to love. So a race of gods were created, but then the gods got a little bit annoyed with one another and themselves. And so this wasn't so much fun that, the greater gods could just kill, make the other lesser gods disappear. And so they decided they would do something that would be a little bit more fun for them, and they would create man. Of course, we know it was the other way around.
Yeah.
Men created these Greek gods, but in the telling of the tale of the beginning, of how it all began, this is how it began. The gift was that the gods from blackness, from nowhere, created this world and then messed it up very dramatically.
Oh, yeah, very much. We're going to get into that. So right now, I want to talk about Pandora and that infamous box.
Yeah, I never quite, I always knew about Pandora, but I never knew the tragedy, really. The real tragedy of it is that she was the woman that the gods created kind of just to create a little mischief. That I guess that's why, women are thought of as being little troublemakers, because that's how the gods kind of conceived of them. And they created Pandora, and then Epimetheus fell in love with her, and they were living very happily. But Zeus had given her a box, and also had gifted her, and I'm putting gifted in quotes, gifted her with curiosity and a box she was told never to open. A very, very difficult task to be curious and have something you can't look into. Well, of course, eventually she had to open the box, and out flew illness, crime, every evil and terrible thing that could befall man. And then her husband Epimetheus slams closed the box, and later on that day she thinks she hears it speaking to her, open me, and she opens it, and the last thing in the box comes out, and that's hope. So there was one good thing in that box of all evil and terrible things. And that's the story of the beginning. And there is hope. There is always hope.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. It's almost like, as you mentioned, women are portrayed as troublemakers, even in the Bible. Hey, Eve, stay away from that apple.
That's right. It's always us. We're always the one getting things wrong and causing trouble.
Now I have sin for the rest of my life. Thank you.
Yeah, you go. There you go.
All right. Now, the next one I want to talk about, which is the title of the book, The Limits of Light. And you already mentioned it's about Icarus. It's funny because a lot of these Greek gods and Greek mythology tales I've heard about I love all kinds of music. If you saw my collection, I can go from Beethoven to Slayer to Madonna to ABBA. I mean, I like it all. But there's a metal band called Iron Maiden. They had The Flight of Icarus, and I love that song. And I knew the lyrics and reading it, and it was funny reading a poem. As you talked about, was that he wanted to reach higher and higher, and then he got burned by the sun.
Well, his father created the wings for him from feathers and wax, and told him he mustn't fly too close to the ocean because the dampness will compromise the wings, and he mustn't fly too close to the sun. But he was bored by the limits of light. He was bored by the just being safe and escaping. They were being held prisoners, and his father gave him this gift. He was not going to be free, but his son would be. But his son couldn't obey the rules, couldn't stay within the limits of light, and flew too close to the sun, and it melted the wax, and he fell to his death. So there was a cautionary tale there, when you're told that something works this way and this is the way to use it, and don't strive for more than you can accomplish. I guess that was the lesson. And his father, Daedalus, ended up watching his son fall to his death.
There's a lot of parallels with this and probably other religions too, but I'm thinking the Bible, like similar to the Tower of Babel, where they were trying to make it higher and higher. I think that was the story for the Tower of Babel, right?
Right.
I haven't been to Sunday school in a long time,
Uh,
but
okay.
but
Well,
it
I'm
seems
not,
like
yeah,
there's a lot of parallels between Greek mythology and at least Christianity that I'm noticing.
I guess what that tells us is that no matter where we came from, whatever our background is, whatever religion we are familiar with, the tales are very much the same. I would imagine that if you went from one to the other, you would find that they are very much the same. And the reason for that is because we never learned. We
Yes.
just keep doing the same things, making the same mistakes over and over again. The stories are there. They're there. They're like signposts. Don't do this. And and yet we do,
I
and
know.
are still doing it.
I know. It's just everything, as they say, history is doomed to repeat itself. It's just,
Yes,
and
yes.
for some reason, people, as you mentioned, it's the stories are there. You see what happens, and you read it, and say, oh, "Okay, put it down and just do exactly what you're not supposed to do." But hopefully, one day we'll get to that point, but not in our lifetime. I know that.
No, I don't think in mine for sure. I certainly hope so. I have 7 grandchildren, and I'm so hoping for a kinder, cleaner, safer world for them. It's not looking good at the moment, but again, we have that eternal gift of hope.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm counting on.
I'm glad that one thing escaped from the box, hope.
And me too, me too.
Now, as I mentioned before, I was trying to find the best poems, and there's not one weak poem in this book. So I was going through the book. Next one I want to talk about is, and I want to talk about how this is very relevant to what's going on today, Apollo and Daphne. To me, when I was reading it, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought it was really very relevant to the hashtag Me Too movement.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, you can find parallels in the poems to just about anything in today's world. I mean, it is almost as if it's a reflection of the past. Um, yeah, I mean, it's the arrogance of believing that if I want it, I can have it, and it is the awful feeling of I want to be me, I want to live my life my own way, I don't want anyone to tell me who I should be or how I should live. And when those two forces come together, it can't be a happy outcome
Yeah.
for anyone.
All right, now for the fan favorite, Medusa.
Medusa, yeah, she got a really bum rap. Medusa. I always just thought of her as this terrible gorgon with the snakes for hair, never knowing that her story is really is so sad in that she was condemned to this life because of her beauty. She vied in beauty with Minerva, and Minerva was a god and Medusa was not. And so she was condemned to this life where if any man looked at her, he would immediately be turned to stone and would of course die. And no one ever talked about what must she have been feeling. That wasn't who she was. She didn't want to be evil. She didn't want to condemn men to death. And yet here was this woman inside of her who had just wanted to be, to live, to love. So I was very taken with that story. I had heard of Medusa all my life and never known that this was something that was inflicted on her, that she wasn't born this gorgon, this terrible creature. And so there's a lot of sympathy for Medusa in the poem.
Yeah, which I'm glad you brought up because I never knew that story either. I remember her from watching the Sinbad movies in the 70s. Medusa, the evil woman with, as you said, the serpents and turning men to stone. And I never even heard of Minerva until maybe recently. And I never knew the story that she was just so jealous of her beauty that she turned her into that. So I'm glad that, I think that it was just an easy cop out for movies and tales and stories to say, oh, this evil woman Medusa, instead of going into the history of it. So, and when I was reading that, and that was one of the ones that you read the books or signing, I said, wow, I learned a lot about that. And like you, I said, she's very misunderstood and she got a bad rap.
She did. She really did. And well, I'm not going to give away the ending of the poem, but yeah, it was very, very sad, actually.
Yeah. All right. Now, well, actually, we won't talk about the end of the poem. I wanted to talk about that, but you know what? You got to buy the book. Definitely buy the book. We're
There
going to talk
you go.
about
You got to buy the book. Amazon. You can buy it on Amazon.
now. I want to talk about. Sorry about that. I want to talk about Zeus because I portrayed Zeus, and I never even knew the story of him. Now, tell me how Zeus almost didn't exist because of the paranoia of his father.
Yeah, well, you know, the stories of Greek mythology and Greek gods, there is so many moments in time when somebody was rising to power and the father or the brother felt that they were getting too powerful, and so destroyed them. And Zeus's story is really fascinating. And I tried to portray the fact in my poem about Zeus that even a god can be hurt emotionally, can be hurt, can be reduced to human feelings. I mean, after all, what we know is that the Greek gods were created in the image of men, but so much more powerful, so much more grand. And yet they do the same things that men do, and they suffer from the same conditions. A broken heart is a broken heart, whether you're a god or a man. And so that really is what I wanted to tell about Zeus, is that he too was subsequently knew what it was like to suffer the pain and anguish of lost love and being being able to feel the human emotions.
Yep. Well, as you mentioned, all these gods have human characteristics: greed, envy, just the want for power, and yeah. Then even though they're gods, they still have all of these emotions that, well, as you said, we created the gods, so that's probably why they have all these emotions.
That's right. They are just grand reflections of us.
No, what about the son of Apollo?
The son of Apollo. Okay, which poem are we referring to now?
Well, the reason I want to talk about that was because it said that he was either the son of Apollo or Helios, because there was two gods associated with the sun. Let me see which one. While we'll take a short commercial break while we get into this poem, because I can't remember his name, but
I'm trying to think of the let's see.
I'll tell you, it's right here. It was called Phaeton.
Or to Phaeton, right. Let me get to that so I can, yeah, okay. Yes, he was, Phaeton was the son of Apollo, and he was born of a human mother, and he wanted to think of himself as a god. And his father kept telling him, you cannot be a god. And he wanted to ride the chariot of fire across the sky. And that was a very difficult task. You had to be a god to be able to do that. But his father, Apollo, relents at the end and says, okay, you can do this. I can't say no. I'm not going to give away the poem, but obviously it cannot end well. As with most of the stories of Greek mythology, they don't end well for anyone, not for the gods, not for the humans, not for those who love the gods. They end up being victims of their own grandeur and their own power.
Yeah, he's definitely one on a list of many that ended like that. And that's why I love doing this, because we're not giving anything away. It's sort of like a teaser trailer for your book. And I want people to, because there's, just to let my viewers know, there's so much more to these poems. We're going through all the poems, but it's a great book, great read, and there's so much more information packed into this book. So I just want to give my viewers a taste of what we're talking about here. And as I mentioned, you have so many great stories in here, so many great poems. Another one is the story of Scylla.
Scylla. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. You know, I'm going to need to have you tell me the name of the poem that you're talking about.
All right. It was called, I think it was called Daphne. No, wait, you were. Maybe not.
Scylla.
I'm looking for it now.
Okay.
I think it was called, is it the
Oh, yeah. Okay. She was the one who fell in love with. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
And she.
yeah, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. I was gonna say she was torn between her lover and her father.
Right. Right. And the city of Megara was under siege, and I'm not going to give the story away, but she's torn between the love of her father and the love of her city, of her people, and what her heart is telling her she needs, because she falls in love with the invading king, and she wants to be with him. She can only be with him if she betrays her father. What do you do? What is the outcome? Cannot be a good outcome there either. But in each of these stories, the decision that is made is one that we all have to wonder about. What would we have done? And it's not that they're gods. It's not, that is not the story. The story is that they are very human, all of them. And the mistakes they make are human mistakes. And the only difference is that the gods had more power, so they could make grander mistakes, bigger mistakes that had more dire consequences for everyone. But there's Scylla, who must decide which way to go. Shall I go with follow my heart, my passion, or loyalty? And it's a very hard choice to make.
And you're gonna have to buy the book to find out what happens to Scylla.
You certainly do. I love this. We're just putting it out there.
Now the next one, I think, is more relevant than probably any of the poems that I read. Good old Narcissus.
Ah, yeah.
There's a little too much of that going around these days.
Absolutely. And that's also, I mean, we've all heard of narcissism. We've heard of Echo. I never knew the two had come together. I never knew the story behind that. There was innocence and just pure love and passion on the part of Echo. And there was Narcissus, and he was not interested in anything but himself, or anyone but himself. And their story is really sad for both of them. You know, there was the possibility of a really happy ending that did not come about, because once again, you know, the gods were mostly in love with themselves. And so there was very little room in their lives and in their hearts for someone else. And in Narcissus's case, that's a hard word to get out, Narcissus's.
Say that one 3 times fast.
In his case, he doesn't even understand. I mean, he actually falls in love with himself without understanding that he is falling in love with himself. It's a complicated story, again, with an ending for both of them that perhaps would not have been what they chose. I'm only going to say that.
Well, like I said, you have to buy the book to find out what happened.
You have to buy the book. You have to go there. You have to go listen to the stories. The stories are so compelling. They really are. I mean, I'm not talking about my poems. I'm talking about the actual stories of the Greek gods. They are really compelling. There's almost not one that I read that I mean, I read so many. I had to finally say to myself, that's it. I'm not writing. I mean, if I want to really get this book out there, I just have to stop, make it into a book, and send the manuscript out and see what happens. And um, thankfully, I found a lovely young woman who was able to help me with the formatting, because I had no idea how to do that. You know, you can't just type up a manuscript, put it in the mail, and send it out anymore. It has to go through all this formatting. And so she did that for me and sent it out. And I was just amazed how quickly it was accepted. It obviously resonated. So I was delighted about that.
Well, I'm curious, how long ago was this written? Like, because
Oh,
there's a lot of English words that we're taking from Greek mythology.
yeah. How long ago did I write this
No, not
book?
you. How long was the Greek mythology? All these tales, how long were these parables written? Like what years?
Oh, that I couldn't tell you the
Okay.
years. Yeah, no, but I mean, it's certainly, yeah, it is certainly part of all of our history. And we know what happened not only to the Greek gods, but we know what happened to the grand Greek Empire. It just collapsed in on itself. Um, so, you know, it goes back to those times, to the ancient Greece, when obviously the gods were going to be the savior, I guess, of the world, and they ended up as they are today. You know, those who would call themselves gods today, you know, destroying rather
Yeah.
than creating.
Now, is there any history on who might have originated these stories, where they came from?
You know, it depends on which book you're reading, and you know, it's like who wrote the Bible exactly. If you
Yeah.
wanted to, if yeah, the questions are, it's an endless question, and there really is no answer that I know of. Now, I am not a scholar of Greek mythology. I am just a, you know,
Man.
a student of it and a fan of it. But I'm by no means a scholar. I'm sure that if you spoke to someone who was a scholar, they would have a much better answer for you than I. I just fell in love with the stories.
Yeah, no, I can see why, because very recently, last week, when I saw you, that's when I started reading more and more about it. And I, very similar to you, I wanted to learn more. I read more things. I looked up things online after reading you'd mentioned something in your book. Let me look this up. And it's just, yeah, it's very, very interesting. And something that I've known the names for so long. As I mentioned, Medusa, Icarus. There's so many different things that I've read in books, seen in movies, listened to in songs. And when I finally found out the history behind it, that's when it really got me, and how interesting it is and how relevant. I have to keep going back to that, how relevant these stories are. But like you said, I'm sure if you do other stories from other religions, you can look and see how relevant it is today, because everybody just keeps doing the same thing, doing the same mistake over and over and over again. And just, they don't seem to learn.
No, you know, my son, who was, he's a physician, he's a doctor, he's a doctor really interested in public health, but he's also a poet. And he writes poetry, and he wrote the introduction for me for the book, and he calls it a cautionary tale. You know,
Yeah.
and that's exactly what it is. I wrote the book with the hope that those people who read it would say, I don't want to do that. I don't want to make that mistake. I mean, by letting out all of these disastrous things into the world, it was almost like you know, a plague on the earth, on the land, on the people. And aren't we doing that right now? You know, with pollution and all of the things that we're doing that are harming not only us, but the only home we have is this planet. So yeah, I just hope people find in it the desire to change, to make things better. That I guess that's part of why I wrote it. I think that's why you write poetry, is because you feel something so intensely, and you want to touch somebody, you want to reach somebody, you want them to feel what you're feeling, and maybe that will change things a little bit. Maybe it'll change them. I don't know. You know, I think that's a big part of why I wrote this book.
Yeah, No, well, I'm glad you did. I'm sure there's a lot of other people out there that are glad that you did as well, which is a perfect segue what I want to talk about next, because the final poem is entitled The Gift. What is the gift?
Uh, the gift is hope.
Mhm.
That's exactly what the gift is. It was probably the only gift the gods gave us, is the gift of hope. And
Yeah.
if we have that, it might just create the incentive to do better, to be better, to make things better.
Yeah.
So far, we haven't done a good job of that, but I don't think we've lost hope just yet. And as long as we have that, and I think that was the message of the story of the creation of everything, was that I'm going to give you something that can change everything, make everything good, everything safe, everything that you want, you can find if you just hold on to hope. Well, we've been holding on. We've been really holding on, and it gets harder and harder. But that is what the gift was. That was the gift in the beginning, and then the book ends almost with an embrace of that poem. The gift in the beginning, the gift in the end, and in both cases, the gift was hope.
Well, not for everybody, but what they say is knowledge is power. So hopefully people like you putting things out like this is going to touch somebody, and that one person is going to start a movement or something to say, no, we got to change our ways. Maybe it may start out really small and it'll grow bigger and bigger. And this is where I think the good and bad with social media is. Social media, to me, there's so many bad things. We can go on and on. That'd be another whole show. But I think social media is also good because when you use it for good, you can get people all on the same page, people, like-minded people say, you know what, we got to change this. We got to help the planet. We got to do this. And that's why I think it's good that there is still hope out there. And there's still people that want to see change for the better. It's just that they need to just become stronger and stronger, because there's too many people out there that just don't really care. All they care about is themselves, going back to narcissists.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's a God that we can identify just about any human trait with. I mean, the
yeah,
reality is, you read the newspaper. Every day when I turn the radio on, I listen to the news, or I pick up a newspaper. There it is. There is a story that relates not necessarily to one of my poems, but I mean, there are so many stories in Greek mythology. You could go on and on and on, but each one of them is a cautionary tale. Each one of them is saying, look at what we did. Look at the selfish, greedy reasons we did these things.
yeah.
And then just transpose that onto today. We're doing the exact same things for the same reasons. We're not necessarily calling ourselves God this or God that, but that's what we're feeling, some people in our world today, that they are entitled to live like gods, to do what they please at the cost of what? The planet, the human life. It's kind of terrifying to think that we are not bright enough, not caring enough to have learned the lessons that are so clearly there for us. So I mean, I could go on. I could have written 100 poems, 1,000 poems. There's that many stories of Greek mythology, not lesser gods, not all gods that we know the names of, but the stories are all pretty much the same in terms of the kinds of ways that the gods behaved.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I think the biggest God working today is the God of apathy.
You may be right there, Rich. Yeah, I have what I need, so what do I care about what's going on in the world? Yeah,
Exactly.
I hope that's not true, but it may be. It
Yeah.
may be.
Unfortunately, it seems that way. More like, if it didn't happen to me, why should I worry about it? I see a
Right.
lot of that, which is the God of apathy. Well, you know what? This is a great book. One more time, I want to show my viewers, you have to buy it. It's great. There's so many cautionary tales in there. It's written very, very well. It's easy to read. It's interesting. I couldn't put it down. And I really had zero interest in Greek mythology until last week when I met you. now there's so many other things I want to know about and learn about. So I'm waiting for you to come out with your next book.
Well, interestingly enough, I do have a next book coming out in 2022, but it is not about Greek mythology.
What's that going to be about?
It is a kind of almost a history. I wrote it over a period of many years, and the poems are about life, about love, about loss. And some of them are about things that I read in the newspaper, quite stories that just touched me, and I couldn't deal with. I mean, they were just there in my head. I was explaining to one of my granddaughters the other day. She is a wellness coach, and we were talking about the fact that poetry heals. Writing poetry is a healing thing to be doing. And some of these stories I would read, and it was like taking a breath in and not being able to breathe out. They were just there. And so I had to write the poems. One is called 40 North Main Street. One is about a battered child. One is about an article that I still have the newspaper, where there was an article in the paper that said Kennedy still lives. And it was all a farce that he was killed. And I couldn't get that out of my head. So there's a lot of interesting poems. The title of the book is Dreaming Missouri. I'll let you know when it comes out, and I'll get you a copy.
I was going to say, thank you very much. I'm going to have you back on the show for that one.
Okay, I've been delighted to be back, Rich. It was really, as I said, I've been very fortunate. I've met some wonderful people over the years, so I was delighted to have met you the other night. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on the show.
Oh yeah, well, we're not done yet, but I just want
Okay, we're not done yet. All right.
I have a little bit, couple more things, so I want to promote you now. I want people to find out where, and I was going onto your website, and I want to talk about that because I love your website. It's got poetry prompts, poem of the week, lessons, and the last example that I read, and I wrote it down, even though I think you have a new one out because it comes out weekly.
It does, yes, for every Friday.
Yeah, one was simply write a poem of what you love. And we've been talking about that. And I love the fact that you're just going into a newspaper, going online, writing from the heart. It's just write what you know, write what you love, just write.
Right, exactly. In fact, starting this coming Friday, we are going to start addressing the whole idea of poetry heals. Poetry is something that is therapeutic, and I am going to connect with my granddaughter and her wellness, because she talks about loving yourself, and you're the person that you are going to have to be with your whole life. So if you don't start out by being good to you, how can you be good to anyone else? How can you be there for anyone else if you're not there for yourself? And I said, that's so much about what poetry is all about. It's about being good to yourself, getting the words out. And so over the next couple of months, 2 or 3 months, I'm going to start addressing that, how to do that, how to put the words down, how to find them inside of you. We all have words. You know, I once I was teaching a class, and I asked the kids, I told them, I want you to use all of your senses, the 5 senses, and your feelings, your emotions, and I want you to describe a color. And describe it for someone who may never have seen it. So it can be blue or green or yellow, whatever color you choose. And one little girl raised her hand and said, oh, I can't do it. I can't think of anything. I can't. And I said, well, you know what? Just pick a color, write the color on your page, and think about it. And halfway through the class, her little hand went up and she's waving it. And I said, did you have something you want to share? She said, well, I know it's not right, but I wrote something and I will share it. And what she wrote is, blue is the color of wonders. Now, that was so amazing to me and so deeper than she even knew, that I ditched my whole lesson plan, and all we did for the next 3 or 4 days was write about wonders and explore that within ourselves. So there's poetry inside of everyone. I'll tell you another story of when I was teaching, and I had just started out going to classes. And I went into this classroom, and a young boy, maybe he was about 13, when they introduced me as the poet. In those days, they each had their individual desks, with a little writing tablet there. picked up his desk, turned it around, and sat down with his back to me. That was very encouraging. I was really feeling very confident at that point. But I went ahead with my class. And then when I told the kids to write, I went over to him. His name was Freddie. I've never forgotten. And I said, Freddie, you can write anything you want. He said, well, I'm really angry. I don't want to write poetry. I said, well, then write your anger. So when it was time to share, with his back to me, Freddie raised his hand and he was willing to share. And what he wrote was, Mrs. Katz asking me to write poetry makes me feel like the inside of a rat's mouth. My teeth want to taste blood.
Wow.
Now, that was so powerful that I said, Freddie, you are born to be a poet. I mean, that is just absolutely perfect. And Freddie and I became good friends after that day. But the point is, everyone who thinks there's no poetry inside them, they're wrong. It's there. It's there.
Well, I think what he said it perfectly without even realizing it, and the other girl did too. I know it's not correct. No, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just write what you feel. And I think a lot of people are more afraid. They probably have a lot of things they want to say and can say, but they're afraid of what other people might think about it. I think, unfortunately, that's the biggest problem with people just starting out with that. They're more afraid of, and to me, I'm so glad with all the things that I've done, I have a very thick skin because I know there's going to be people that like it and people that don't like it. As long as I like it, I'm happy. So, and once they realize that, they'll find out that they have a poet inside of them.
Right, exactly. And that's why you write. You write for yourself.
Yeah.
You know, I could reach over by my desk here and I could take out stacks of things that are just a few lines, just something that came to me that I needed to say. Wrote it down, never became a full poem. It doesn't have to be a full poem. It's just a way of releasing what you're feeling in a way that it's helpful to you. And if you share it with someone, perhaps it will be helpful to them. But it's just about that release, that exhaled breath, letting your breath out, letting that emotion out. And I think today more than ever, people need that. I think people are just, wow, it's crazy what's going on. And how do you deal with that? You have to find a way.
Yeah, no, I think that I always say this to people. I said, you don't have to make it as a living, but everybody should have a passion. Everybody should have a hobby, something they do because they love. Don't do it because you like, for example, so many things I've done, like writing a book and doing this and doing comedy. Well, why do you do that? You're not making any money. I said, I love doing this. And an example was what you just mentioned with doing this, the podcast. I have met so many interesting people, so many great people, made so many friends just doing this show. And I don't care if I make money. I mean, I'm not going to stop it. If a check comes in, I'm going to cash it, but
right.
I'm not doing it. I'm doing it because I love doing this. And the same thing with comedy, same thing with books. And that's why I think that I love what you said is like, do it because you love it. And I was telling you this at the library. I said, when I was at a part of a writing group, and one of the writers said, well, who do I write for? I said, what do you mean? Well, I'm trying to think of the audience. I said, why don't you write for yourself and let the audience find you? Because if you write thinking what people want to hear, you're not going to get, it's not going to come from the heart and it's going to be more generic. But when you write what you love, somebody's going to find it, and maybe you won't have mass appeal, but to me, I don't really want mass appeal. I'd rather have that small hardcore group that really loves me instead of like everybody going, yeah, he's okay.
Yeah, I feel that way too. You know, it's interesting. You talked about the website. When I launched the website, you never have any idea who is going to come to it or how you're going to draw people in a very interesting kind of something that I hadn't anticipated. It really resonated in India. And I have received so many poems from young people. And in fact, I actually struck up kind of a friendship with a woman in India. Her name is Sukrita, and she is an artist. She does these amazing abstract paintings. She's also a poet. She writes poetry and a musician, an amazingly talented woman. And she had sent me a couple of poems and I had commented on them and edited, gave a couple of editing suggestions. and we started to communicate, and I ended up buying one of her paintings. And it's just amazing how reaching out through a poem, or through offering someone the opportunity to share their poem, which is part of what the website is about, where that takes you. You know, I mean, I have this friend I'll never meet in India that we connected through poetry. I'm sitting here in Connecticut, you know, chatting away with her on Messenger in a small little town in India. And she has had her poem published. Sometimes I will choose a poem of the week, and it'll be from someone who sent it in. So she's had her poem published on the website where she could send her friends to see it, which was very meaningful for her. So yeah, you know, you never know how the lines are going to cross and how you're going to connect. I never in a million years suspected I would be getting all this communication from people. And I love it because it will address me as ma'am. Everybody calls me ma'am when I get the, it's lovely. I mean, they thank me so from the heart for reading their poem and commenting on their poem. And it's so gratifying for me as well.
Yeah, well, I love the fact that it has worldwide appeal. I want to say something about India because years ago, I was a manager of a retail store, and I had a girl from India. So she started giving me these Bollywood movies. I love them because it doesn't matter what genre it is. It could be horror, comedy, drama. All of a sudden, they'll break out into song and dance. It'll be 4 hours long. It's just, I love the Indian culture. I learned so much from her, and I don't know anything about their poetry or writing, but what made me think of that story was watching the movies from Bollywood. And I still enjoy them. For some reason, I live in Farmington, and AMC, they show a lot of the Indian movies, and also in Waterbury, the owner, I think the owners are Indian. So every once in a while I'll go in there and check them out, only if I have 5-6 hours to spare in a day. But I love the fact that that's one of the good things about social media and how we can put our stuff online, because before, if maybe we're lucky if somebody, you know, saw it at Barnes and Noble or wherever you have your book, but now you can put it online. People all over the world are commenting on it. People are inspired by it, and you're changing lives without even realizing it all over the world. So that is a very good story. I love that story.
Yeah, no, I was amazed and really touched. I mean, I still get some poems and some comments, and it's amazing because they don't have, the people who are sending me the poetry from India, they don't have outlets particularly, and they're passionate people. You know, their poems are filled with emotion and passion and feeling, and whether it's love or loss or lack of self-esteem, it's there in their poetry, and in English is a second language. And so they're writing in English, and some of their poems are really remarkable. So it's been extremely gratifying for me. I had no idea the reach of the website would be like that. So yeah, it's been fun.
Well, also, I want to stick with the website for a while because I was fascinated by this. It had so much to it. There's another area that you have for poetry submissions, as we mentioned. And then there's another part, if you have questions or some doubts, and either you want just someone to read it, or for a price, you're actually give them some serious analysis. So tell me about that. If somebody had a poem and they said, you know what, I really am not sure about this, what do you think? What would be the next step for them?
Well, what I ask people to do, and I haven't been charging anything. I mean, I'm just so happy to be able to do it. What I've been asking people to do is to go to the website, www.poetladykatz.com, and then click on the chat room. And then you can submit your poem there. I will read it and I will comment on it, and I will comment back and forth with you a little bit. And if you go into the chat room, the poems that have been sent there, you'll see them and you'll see the comments. And it's just a place where you can tell your friends, my poem is up on the internet. It's on the internet, and it is, and they can come to the website, click on the chat room, and click on your poem and see your poem. So that gives people an audience, gives them an opportunity to feel as though they've reached well beyond what they ever thought they could with their poetry. And it's very gratifying for me because a lot of the things that are coming my way are really well written, well thought out, and beautiful emotion, beautiful feeling that I relate to. I can feel what they're feeling. And that's for me what poetry is all about.
Yep. Sure, there's a lot of Freddies out there.
There are a lot of Freddies out there, and there are a lot of the little girl who said blue is the color of wonders that have poetry in them and are not even aware of it.
Yeah. No, well, I love the fact that not only are you putting your work out there, but you're also inspiring people to put their work out there. And I think that that's what they need. They need somebody to say, it's all right, just write this down. And you give them a sense of encouragement instead of maybe their friends will say, oh, come on, what are you, stupid? You know, they'll sort of, people that unfortunately, not everybody's like this, but when they don't know exactly what it is, they'll put it down without even realizing why they're putting it down, just because they're not familiar with it. Like, oh, what? Why would you want to do that? It's like, do you even know what I'm doing? So unfortunately, they're probably surrounded by more people like that. So I think having an outlet where you can say, you know what? No, this is great. Did you ever try this? And that gives them more encouragement, and it makes them want to do it even more, and it brings out their creativity. So I love the fact that you have that part on your website.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really important part of the website. And you know, when people tell me, oh, I can't write poetry, do you have words? If you have words, you have the tools to write a poem. It's that simple. And a poem can be, it can be a rhyming poem. It can be, you know, in the contemporary form. It can be free verse. There's no, as you said, and as I always told my students, there's no right or wrong. It's not like it's a question with a particular answer. Yeah. Poetry is whatever you're feeling, and you put that down, that's your poem. And if you're really interested and serious about turning it into what you would consider, you know, publishable poetry, then we have to work on it. Then we have to do some editing. We have to do some rewriting. But I never write a poem that is, I consider, a finished poem. I mean, I always feel as though I could be changing it. I can't think of the name of the poet at the moment, but I was at a reading once, and the poet was reading from his book, as you know, like he picked up his book and he was reading. And in the middle of the poem, he took out a pen from his pocket, and he's crossing a word out and writing another word in the book. And the book had been published many, many years before. But that's how poets kind of think of their work. You know, I would have written it differently today. I would have chosen a different word. So it's a living process. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah, and it's similar to with me writing stories. And that was something else. I actually taught a class on this, where perfection is the death of good. And so many of the people, I think I mentioned this to you off the air, I said that I started the writing group. In between that time, I wrote my stories, had them published, did 3 book signings. They're still working on their first story. And they kept saying, well, it's not exactly where I want it. I said, you're never going to get it exactly where you want it. Just get it as good as you can be right now, and then move on to the next thing. You'll never get it done. And I agree with what you said too, though. It's just that it's always a work in progress. So for you, though, I'm curious, how many drafts do you do before you finally say, all right, I'm publishing this?
That would depend, I guess, on the poem. The poem that I wrote for my father, I couldn't bear to send it out. Each time I would read it, I wanted to change something, and I wanted to change something. I probably changed that poem, rewrote it, I don't know, 100 times before I finally said I have to walk away from it. I have to be able to just say it's done, and sent it out, and somebody accepted it for publication. And but I guess it depends on the poem and just how emotionally involved I am with it. You know, sometimes I write a poem and it just comes. It's almost as if there's a muse sitting on my shoulder, whispering in my ear, and all I'm doing is doing the typing. And the poem just sort of happens. It just is born right there and then. And maybe just a word or two will be changed, or I'll change a line break, because line breaks are very important in poetry. Where you end a line and where you begin the next line sometimes changes the meaning of what you're saying. So I will very often fiddle with the line break for a while till I get it exactly, get the rhythm the way I want it to be. But it just depends, I guess, on the poem.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the muse, and this only happened to me with one of the stories, but I was so into it. I actually I'm writing it, and I can't wait to see what's going to happen next. And then I realized, wait, I'm the one writing it, because I was watching the character do this and do that, and I said, oh boy, this is really getting good. And it was funny because I heard Stephen King mention he has a great book called, for people who are interested, it's called On Writing, and he talks all about how he became a writer, and it's more than just it's more like a memoir. It's a great book, but he was talking about that, and he goes, when that happens, it's magical. And that only happened to me once, where it's just, I was so into it. It was like a muse was writing it for me, and I couldn't wait to see what was going to happen next. And I realized, oh, wait, I have power over this. I can change this if I want. So that is such a great feeling. And
it is. It's the best feeling in the world when the poem writes itself or the story writes itself. Yep.
It's even better when it sells itself.
Well, yeah, that's less likely, but yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to talk about, the website is great, and we know where to find that. Where can people find your books?
The books are the easiest place, obviously, is Amazon. They're on Amazon. They should be in Barnes and Noble. I believe if you're in Washington, Connecticut, they're in the Hickory Stick Bookshop. Yeah, they're not hard to find. You go right on Amazon. They give you great prices there. So yeah, that would probably be the best place to go.
I love Amazon. So many people.
Yeah, and that's so easy.
And you know what gets me mad? This is another whole conversation that would take 4 hours, but I just want to say this part was when people got mad at Amazon at the beginning of the pandemic. I said, it's not like that he created the pandemic so he can get Amazon out. He just happened to be at the right place at the right time. Everybody needed that product. Everybody wanted it. It was the safest way to do it. So I personally am a fan of Amazon. And my brother, for example, used to be a fighter pilot. Now he's an airline pilot. He said he would be in the middle of the ocean on an aircraft carrier. He would get packages from Amazon. So yeah, I got to tell him to order this one more time.
Yeah, right. It'll come fast. I will say Amazon's amazing. Obviously, we all learned how to shop online during COVID. Yeah. And sometimes, you wait weeks and weeks for something that you ordered. Amazon, you order a book, it's there the next day. I don't know how they do it. It's like I don't know, it's magic. It's really magic.
That's why I brought that up, because I use Amazon all the time. And for me, when I had, my book is self-published, so I had to buy my own books from Amazon and sell them. So I had to order 20 books or 25 books. They were there within 2 days. 25 books. So I loved it. I said, I have a book signing in 3 days. No problem. We got this for you.
Yeah, no, they're amazing. They really are. I ordered something from Hammerke Schlemmer. I got the package about 3 or 4 weeks after I ordered it, and it wasn't what I ordered. It was an electric pruner or something, and the invoice said what I ordered, but the package had something else. But that never happens with Amazon. They're really just amazing. Yeah. This is kind of a plug for it's not a plug for Amazon, but if you want the book, that's the best way to get it. Just go on Amazon and you'll have it within 2 days.
Yep. And if people want to know more about you, I know you have a newsletter. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I truly love writing that newsletter. I'm also fortunate. I have 2 great people that I'm working with. I have a guy who does all my technical work for me, so I don't have to think about that. And then I have someone, a wonderful young woman, who helps me with social media. And so I'm free to do what I love, which is write. And the newsletter just tries to talk about what I'm thinking about. I'm trying to, this week coming up, we're talking about poetry heals. So my newsletter is about that. And I write a poem each week that goes with the newsletter, kind of to maybe inspire you to write a poem. And the newsletter and the lesson, and then I have an art into art section on my website, where there'll be a picture and there'll be a little caption above it, and then a little line below it that's kind of the beginning of a poem, and the hope that will inspire you. The picture can be of anything, of nature, of a person, so the whole point of the website is to just introduce people to poetry, encourage people to believe in themselves, to be able to write poetry, to be there as a resource to help people if they want to write poetry and they want some comment, they want some feedback, because that's the hardest thing as a writer. I mean, if you're not Stephen King, if you're Rich Sear or Susan A. Katz and you're writing, finding that feedback, getting that, the accolades or the response, it's not even accolades, it's just to know that you touch somebody with what you wrote. That's harder if you're us. So the website is a place where you can reach out, send in a poem, and you'll get a response to it. Somebody will have read it. I will have read it, and I will react to it. And I think that's what we're all hoping for in this world, is just to have someone react to us, to have someone hear us, and to have someone know that we're there and we're feeling things. And so I hope the website is doing that.
Yeah, well, Susan A. Katz, really do appreciate having you on the show. And I think you're doing a great thing. I love the book. Now I want to go back and read the other books. But before we go, one more time, I want to promote you. What's next and where can people find you?
Well, you can find me at www.poetladykatz.com. You can find my book, The Limits of Light, on Amazon. And I will definitely let you all know when the next book is out. Rich, I'll be in touch. And let me just say, Rich, you are a delight. I thank you so much. It was, as we both know, there's not a huge audience for poetry. You walked in the door and the whole kind of the world changed a little bit that night. So I truly appreciate it. And it's just a pleasure knowing you. And I look forward to maybe reading your book and getting to know you better. So thank you so much.
Oh, you are very welcome. But first, before we leave, I saw something and I want to probably check this out. I want my viewers to know about this. You're going to be at the Bantam Cinema. I saw that.
Yes. And you know what? I'm going to try to remember the date here. Hold on.
May 14th, I think it is.
It's May 15th.
15th. Okay.
May 15th, the Bantam Theater at 7 p.m.
Yeah.
And everyone is welcome. We would love to have you. It's a beautiful, they've done a beautiful job of renovating that theater. Have you been there recently?
Yeah, well, I want to tell you a funny story about that, because there's a Facebook site entitled Connecticut Wonderful. And I actually became friends with him and he did a couple segments on me. But before that, I was reading it and I saw Bantam Cinema. I said, I always see that place. I completely forget about it. Let me take a ride down there. And I went down there and I looked in the window and nobody was, I didn't think anyone was there. So I started walking away, the door opened, hey, come on in. I'll give you a grand tour. And I did not realize that they closed for the first time ever since I don't know how many years they've been open,
right,
because of COVID. They just reopened. They have brand new owners and I'm going to have them on the show. I was talking to him for a while. That theater has such a great history too. I never realized it. It's a barn. It was a barn originally.
Right. Robert Kwolek is his name. He's an amazing guy. He is so passionate about this theater, about bringing it to life and introducing new things like poetry readings and workshops. And so, it's really worth seeing, really worth checking out. I'm so glad you brought that up. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
The people who do my publicity would be killing me now. You didn't even talk about your reading at the Bantam Theater. I'm not very good at publicizing myself, so thank you.
Well, that's where I'm going to help you, because I love publicizing myself and I love to help I love to help great people and people who I want more people to know about. And you're one of them, because I love your stuff. And like you said, I really would love to work together doing something. Maybe we could have like dual book signings or something. We'll just have a big event. I would love that, because you're I have this mutual respect for you. When I met you and I walked in there, I didn't want to leave. I was actually, when you kept on saying, should I read another one? Yeah, read another one. I wanted to have you read the whole book, because I was that interested in it. And you're such an interesting speaker. The way you didn't make it boring. That's what I love about that too. You made, as you said, poetry's not for everybody, but you made it accessible to everyone, where somebody could find a common ground with it and say, you know what? I like this. This is for me. So that's takes a lot of talent to do, and you did it.
Well, thank you. I hope you'll come to the Bantam Theater, and we'll have I hope it'll be a wonderful evening, and I would love to do something with you. Yes, let's pursue that. Let's see where that goes.
I'm looking
I
forward
would
to
love that. Yeah. No, that
All
would be wonderful if we do a joint signing, we do a reading together. That would be fun. I would really enjoy that.
We're gonna make this happen. I promise you.
Okay. With you on board, I have no doubt. I'm just the poet. You're the promoter. I have no doubt.
Get on board the Rich Sayre train. We're gonna have some fun.
You got it. You got it.
All right. Well, thanks again, Susan. It was a pleasure to have you on the show, and I'm gonna have you back when you come out with your next book.
Okay. Thank you. And I'll again, I thank you so much. I so appreciate it. Have a great rest of the evening.
Yeah, you as well. That
Thanks.
wraps up the latest episode of the Claus Corner. A huge thank you goes out to the nationally recognized poet and teacher, Susan A. Katz. I would also like to thank the extremely talented John Bristol of Elmwood Productions for editing and making the show look so good each and every week. And lastly, but definitely not least, I want to thank you, the viewer, for tuning in. Enjoy your day, everyone.
Now available in one collection. Confessions of a Frenetic Mind. 5 tales of blood-curdling terror. Available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
All of a sudden I hear, brim, brim.
What's a diaphragm again?
Ha! We caught one.
They're supposed to be weird.
Oh, yeah, no. If you say so.
I've always wanted to be in a movie.
Around